down some celery and peanut butter before this. So that was my lunch. I came straight from what is it, my calculus class. So my brain's a little mushy at the moment.
About to put ants on the celery log. There's no raisins.
That's true. Although I have raisins in the 4 oatmeal tubs of muesli I made for myself the other day. Yeah. I granola is great, but buying it is really expensive. Making it is time consuming.
Yep.
Plus, most granola that you buy has a lot of extra sugar in it, and making it again just takes too much time, and I don't have a lot of that. So I decided muesli's great because I can make it a whole bunch of it in 15 minutes. I go to Aldi and I get one of the big tubes, and then I save my old tubes. And then I have this giant roasting pan, this all-clad roasting pan, and I dump the tube in. And then I go to Farm and Fleet, which is like a local farm supply store. They have dried fruits and stuff and nuts. So I'll go and I'll get a pound of this and a pound of that, a pound of this, and I'll just kind of combine it all and throw that into the thing and stir it up and then fill up my various oatmeal things. It takes 15, 20 minutes or so. Involves no baking, no skills. You just put stuff in and mix it around, and then you put it in the tubes. And then you pair that with Greek yogurt or milk or whatever. And I'm calling it the poor man's parfait.
Okay. It's not poor man's. You got all the nuts and everything.
Yeah. Well, the nice thing is if you buy the same amounts of the nuts and fruits at the grocery store, you're going to spend more money. But
Sure.
at Farm and Fleet, for whatever reason, their nuts and dried fruits are really inexpensive. So
Good for you.
Is it like a bulk food store?
there's more like food aisles surrounded by tires and oil and paint and
Live chickens?
they have live chickens. They do. You make the joke, but they have in the back little chicks that
Yep.
you can buy. And my dog, that they'll allow dogs in Farm and Fleet, and so I'll take Summer with me when we go to pick up her dog food and stuff, and then we'll get in there. And there was one day I brought her back to the chicks, and she was not quite sure what to make of the situation. It was a new smell, it was a new environment, and all of that, and she couldn't really see them, but it was funny. She and I actually yesterday was her 5th birthday. So pretty excited about that. I've had her for 3 years now. I adopted her. She's a COVID dog. And so now she's my partner. We go
What kind of
everywhere.
dog is she?
She's a hound, coonhound.
Okay.
A plot. Supposed to hunt black bears and wild boar. We don't do a lot of that though.
No.
Yeah. Anyway, welcome to this week's office hours. I didn't really promote it this week. I forgot to. It's too much on the plate, and I'm looking forward to a lot of it dropping off. But we can still talk about a bunch of stuff and maybe give some sort of, if I have an org that has something in it, I could show things. But we'll open the floor for questions and stuff.
So I've been here before, so I certainly don't want to dominate the conversation. Kranti, do you have anything?
No, I mentioned to John, I think in the first session, or the second session that I attended, that I worked with John earlier in a project, and I really liked his working style and his knowledge and expertise. And I'm always looking to learn something different from a different perspective and a different expertise. So I'm here to absorb whatever the team is presenting. So at this time, go ahead, take the floor. You can.
Well, there's a lot of experience across all the people who join these calls, and we'll have different experience and different expertise. And that's what's cool about it, is that Kranti, when it comes to revenue recognition, I have no idea what I'm talking about, but that's where you come in. It's like
Right.
revenue recognition, in particular, right rev and the gaps of we're both painfully aware of some of the gaps of the Salesforce billing product and the reasons why you need right rev. And so those sorts of things can be useful too. And I don't want to be just CPQ, although that's where 80% of the conversation will probably be. But we could talk about whatever we want to talk about. I mean, last week we barely talked about Revenue Cloud at all because Jeff was on the call and he wanted to talk about some career stuff. He's looking for a job. And so we started talking about how he might frame his experience. He was actually a customer of mine when I worked at Salesforce. He worked for one of the customers that was assigned to me as the implementation architect. So I got to work with Jeff very closely on a CPQ project where I told him, hey man, if you want some introductions, I know CPQ. You may not be you may not be as far down the path as I am, but you're well on your way down the path. And so we talked about that. We talked about the pain of applying for jobs these days, and everybody's spamming everybody, and everybody's using AI, and we've stripped all of the human aspect out of hiring. And it's funny that it's human resources and people, or now we don't want to call it human resources. That's too dehumanizing. We'll call it people management.
Or asset management,
chief people officer. And okay, that call it whatever you want. It's human resources. How do we take these human beings, get stuff done? But it feels like we're taking more and more and more humanity out of especially the process of hiring and terminations, especially given some of the layoffs that I've seen happen. You find out some of who has been eliminated. And a lot of times you'd say, oh, I mean, you took the bottom 10% of performers and you say, hey, you need to go someplace else. But some of these are the best architects that I knew, and they were just cut without anything. So I'd like to see more humanity injected in the world of work. I don't know if that's asking too much, but I can at least follow that approach in my own businesses, which is nice. That's part of why I'm doing these, is that's that human aspect of it, because so much of it's just good luck, or these other consultancies, they don't want to give away their knowledge. So they're just like, oh, well, we're the experts and we have all this super knowledge of this stuff, and I'm going, prove it. Because if you share everything you know, you'll never be able to share everything because you're still going to be learning new stuff. I could write out everything I know about Revenue Cloud, and sure, that'd probably fill a book at this point. But a lot of times you'll say, cool, he wrote the book on this topic. I'm just going to hire him. It's faster. I don't have the time to read the book. Let me just pay X and I'll get the advice that I need or whatever. Or in this case, we don't have to pay anything, because I'm treating this very much like a marketing and recruiting opportunity. Because at a certain point, I'm going to close some deals, even though this year's been really slow. And I'll either want clients or I'll want consultants, and I could potentially get both out of some of these calls, like Kranti, we've already worked together. So if there was a need for right rev implementations, I'm gonna work with my friends. That's what I'm gonna do.
So I'm not sure. Sorry, Aaron. Just wanted to mention one thing. I'm not sure if you're aware, John, but RevPro, which is a leading revenue automation product, which was the first one that was started by RightRev CEO. He started Leo, and he started RevPro, which is a leading market share in which was bought over by Zora. So I worked with it for 8 years. And then my CEO left Zora and he started RightRev, and then he invited me to join RightRev. So from RevPro, I came to RightRev. So I worked.
You've been doing RevRec for a long time.
Well, almost 11, 12 years now. So it's been quite a while.
I know I'm the host, but I see myself more a facilitator of this call than the one person who knows everything. One of the things that I think would be really useful, and we can get here, this is my question for today's call. I know that on paper, Salesforce Revenue Cloud talks about invoicing, billing, payments, and revenue recognition, and the reporting that goes along with revenue recognition. I have a friend and fellow architect on the Revenue Cloud side whose opinion I really respect. She used to work at Zora, then moved to Salesforce. She worked on the billing product at Zora. And her recommendation to me on a different project, but her recommendation was to never actually do revenue recognition in Salesforce Revenue Cloud. Use something else like a RightRev or something else for revenue recognition. Why is that?
It's because of all the complications that involve the calculation. Salesforce is mainly built for ratable revenue, not the different waterfalls and the different complications that need to be put in for different performance obligations. So this is all driven by GAAP, right? So Salesforce just takes the ratable. So if you have a 12-month contract, a 12-month contract, they just spread the revenue across 12 months. So they don't take into consideration for fair value. So how does fair value change the value of revenue? So if you're selling, say, for example, license and services and maintenance, for example, right, which is a typical product that you would sell. You sell a software, you sell 2 years of maintenance, and then maybe sometimes you throw in some professional services to implement the product. So there is a fair value, market value associated with these three if you are selling them individually or not bundled together. So that fair value is not taken into account by Salesforce. They don't have any place in that. They don't have any placeholder for fair value, and fair value drives everything in revenue. So if you're selling it for $1,200, you may actually recognize $800 because fair value takes away some of that $400 and spread it into the other products that you're bundling together. So there's a lot of complications where revenue is not what you sell, but it is what is derived as a transaction price based on the fair value, which is a complication behind revenue, which none of the ERPs can handle. Only RevPro and RightRev and these products have these calculations built in.
Okay.
To take into account.
And there are also scenarios like the project we worked on together where I sell 10 things, and each of those 10 things will be used at different points in time. So even though I have a subscription to 10 things for the course of a year, it might take a month each to set up those 10 things. So the first item is ready to go in month 1, the second item in month 2. I won't actually be using all of those until the 11th month. I'll be using all of them. So then from what I remember from that scenario is that for that last item that was set up, we want to recognize the whole year of revenue, but only for that last few months once we started using it. I'm trying to keep the scenario anonymized and stuff for the sake of the call being public, but that seemed like a really complicated thing because if I'm out selling thousands of devices and each device could be installed at any point in time, but I want to honor the total revenue and recognize it based on when it was actually used, it gets really, for somebody who's not an expert in that area, which is me, it's still very confusing because on the one hand, for simple math, I have a product that is $100 a month and I sold 10 of them. So then in a year, I can expect $1,200 each device, $12,000 total. And so I've closed a deal for $12,000. So the sales side, I booked $12,000 worth of deal. And then I'm going to send, let's say that I invoice every month. We'll keep it simple again. So I send an invoice every single month. We've got 12 invoices for $1,200 each because we have, for $1,000 each, sorry. For $1,000, yay math. For $1,000 each because we have $100 a device. We have 10 devices over 12 months. Great. So I'm sending invoices out every single month. But then we have this weird revenue recognition thing where each of those 10 devices could be installed at different points throughout the year. And we want to recognize the revenue in a different way that we'll have 10 different revenue schedules. Or is my terminology correct?
Yes,
So we'll have
that's
10
correct.
different potential revenue schedules. So I guess the confusion for me, and maybe you could help, is my understanding is that those invoices that we're creating, we're posting, and we're sending to the customer, that's billing.
That's
And
billing.
then
That's not
revenue
revenue.
recognition is a separate animal in it. It's its own world.
Yeah.
It's got its own rules. But the mechanics of I sold a deal using a quote. I generated an order from the quote. I use the order as the foundation of my invoices. So all of the invoices are based on the order for the sale. And now I got 12 invoices against one order for one quote. But then the revenue recognition itself could be anything. It's all
It'd be
over the place.
anything. So, yep. Let me give you a simpler example. Say, for example, you sell software maintenance and services together, right? So you sell it for, say, $12,000 total. You bill the customer. Customer pays you before you before they start using it. Customer has to buy, so they will pay you the amount for 2 years and then everything. But there is an implementation timeline that takes place. It may be 6 months, it may be 9 months. So for 9 months, all that the customer has paid is a deferred revenue. Until the customer starts using the software, it's still deferred. When the customer signs off the UAT, for example, and then goes into production, that's when it becomes from deferred to the actual recognized revenue. That's when you start recognizing revenue. So even though the customer has paid 9 months before or 6 months before they start using it, it's not declared as revenue. It's still a deferred revenue. It's not. Yeah.
Is it correct to say, as I try to understand this, is it correct to say that every invoice that I send out is accumulating deferred revenue? And then once I start using it, we start to pull off that pile of dollars of deferred. So we kind of get this trade-off that happens. We get rid of the deferred, and then we kind of shovel it over into the recognized pile.
Sometimes some of the services or subscriptions or SaaS is based on invoice. That's when that happens. But sometimes it's based on customer acceptance, customer downloading it, customer using it. Just because you bill doesn't mean that it is becoming a recognized revenue. But sometimes it does. Say, for example, a SaaS service, every month the customer is billed at the end of the month, right? So as soon as you bill it, that's recognized because the customer has used it all the month and you're billing it at the end of the month. That means the customer is liable to pay and you are liable to, you are ready to recognize that revenue. But if you're sending an invoice at the beginning of the month and the customer can cancel at any time in between, that means you cannot recognize the revenue till there is a time. So there are different ways the revenue is recognized. Sometimes it's based on acceptance. Sometimes it's a time based. Sometimes it's invoice based. Sometimes it's when they download it. Sometimes it's like 3 months. After 3 months, you have no right to cancel. We can recognize revenue. The customer has no right to return after 3 months or 9 months, whatever. So there are different rules for revenue recognition, which are called obligations, performance obligations. And those have no placeholder in applications like Salesforce or ERP. So only revenue recognition applications. I include those and build those so the revenue can be recognized accordingly. So very big.
In its simplest context, if you were to go to Taco Bell, they make you pay before they give you your food. But if you were to go to Chris Ruth's Steakhouse, they let you have the full dining experience and give you your bill at the end.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's interesting. How would that be? Because in that case, I would almost think of it like, in this example, Taco Bell, I'm paying in advance. So they're essentially invoicing me. It seems to me still a billing. The first piece is a billing thing. I go to Taco Bell. I get 5 7-layer burritos. I'm a big animal. It takes a lot to feed me. I eat entirely too much. So I go and I get my 7-layer burritos. And they say, before we give you the 7-layer burritos, give us the money. I say, here you go. And then instead, I go to Ruth's Chris the next week, and I have this great dining experience. I'm consuming. I would see that as a billing scenario that's billed in arrears after you have consumed. And this gets into consumption schedules. This could be a really interesting, fun video to make of a restaurant, this exact example, because some of the food is billed in advance, Taco Bell. Some of the food is billed in arrears, fine dining, etc. It's almost like the more expensive the food, the longer they wait to charge you the money. Maybe they'll consume more food if we don't give them the bill until they're done.
Yeah, so consumption is a big part of revenue. So, for example, minutes or data or something that you use, sometimes a phone service, for example, they charge you 100 minutes per month. But if you go over, that is billed in arrears, but the first 100 you have to pay at the beginning of the month, because you use it or lose it, right? If you're subscribed to use 100 minutes. If you don't use it, also you have to pay. But if you use 150 minutes, that is billed the next month, and then you pay the next month. So that goes into the next month revenue. This $100, 100 minutes goes into the first month revenue because they were billed ahead of time.
I mentioned the structure of the products themselves plays an important role in this, because the revenue recognition, that's the very last car of the train. I mean, well, I guess you could say reporting on revenue recognition is the last car.
General ledger is the last.
Yeah. That's the last. Okay. So if general ledger is the last and everything else precedes that, then we really have to make sure that we set things up correctly in the first place. One of the things I've seen over time in Revenue Cloud implementations, or any implementation, is that not enough consideration is given to the end of the process before building stuff at the beginning of the process. For example, if I have an implementation of CPQ and billing, and the customer got really excited, they went to Dreamforce, they saw the demo, they thought that was the greatest thing I've ever seen, I'm going to buy Revenue Cloud. So they buy CPQ, they buy billing, and then you start the project. You start the project and you dive in and you ask the fundamental question of CPQ. What do you sell? That's where it all begins for me. Every single discovery call with CPQ, I begin with, what do you sell? I might have researched this at the company website. I might have a general idea, but I still like to start the conversation there, because at the end of the day, businesses don't exist if they don't have something to sell, whether it's a product or a service. And in the context of CPQ, it doesn't matter if it's a product or a service. It's all products. It's all in the product table. Services orgs get really wrapped up about this and all in a huff. They're like, well, we don't sell products, we sell services, so Salesforce won't work for us because we are different. No, you're not. You sell something. You sell labor, units of labor. You might have those as hourly units. You might have those as a fixed fee of, here's a deliverable that you're going to get for X, or whatever your pricing strategy is. But when you start those conversations, you realize, wow, you don't really even understand what you sell. And then you dig into the products and the price books, and you start to see, wow, you have a lot of extra products in here. What are all of these things? Or maybe you have none. And then you ask, okay, well, where do we plan on starting? Well, that's what you're for. No. You have to think about some of this stuff before we even have this conversation. A lot of customers would benefit from a project zero. where you really start to understand your own business. Because in an effort to grow and scale, bro, gotta go real fast, which I grow an increasing disdain for that culture as time goes on, because it just leads to disasters in a variety of contexts. That's a whole separate rant I won't bore you with right now, but they haven't given enough thought to the front end of the process. And it's like that game of telephone that you play as a kid, where you tell the first person something and then they tell the next person. By the time you get to the 10th person, it's something completely different.
It's different.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the same thing here. I'm trying to get information from step 1 to step 10. But if we don't clearly understand what the information is in step 1, and we pass misinformation or no information to step 2 and step 3, and each one has some leakage of accuracy and precision and all of that, by the time you get to revenue recognition and general ledger, a poor accounting team's going, what is this? I don't know that because I've never been on those teams, but I assume just based on, I don't know, I assume based on extrapolation that that's probably what happens. The accounting and finance teams are going, you sold what? For how much? When? You gave them what terms?
Discounts. What
Yeah.
discounts?
Oh, discounts are, I'm sure that's a whole interesting can of
that's a whole.
worms.
Yeah. So it's very interesting when you work as a consultant, when you see these projects implemented in isolation without having a thought of, start to end process. And a lot of times, smaller companies, revenue is 90% done on Excel. They don't have money or the time or the time invested to implement an automation tool, because they're working on building products, selling, and just working on that. So when they grow to a sizable size, that's where, or when they're going for an IPO, that's when they're like, wait, we need automation. We cannot have manual revenue recognition tools for an audit to certify to go to an IPO. And that's when they start looking into some kind of automation. But that's when a revenue person goes to look at their system, they realize their whole upstream process is not conducive to how revenue can be recognized in an automated way. So then you'd have to re-engineer or back engineer or reverse engineer and go all the way back and say, you need to change all these upstream processes so that your revenue is automated and not put in a lot of customization of, upstream processes have to be changed. Otherwise, you cannot do it. So it's a very, I mean, if everything is done at one time, like there are companies who do like billing, CPQ plus revenue automation, then it becomes much easier because everybody is working towards one product.
Well, and that's what I noticed with the project we worked on together, was that we had all of these people talking about the same thing at the same time, and you can start to figure out where there are disconnects. That's another common
dependency. Yeah.
What was that?
Dependencies and disconnects. Yeah.
It also seems to be the case that in addition to thinking about the end of the process too late, we often involve the right people at the wrong time, or the wrong people at the right time, and getting the correct people in the room at the correct time to discuss the correct thing is a challenge as well. When you have a CPQ project, and let's say that for phase 1, we're only worried about CPQ, often you'll find that you'll get the sales leaders, you'll almost never get an actual end user who's got to use the damn thing, which causes its own problems, because then the executives are, well, we need to know this, and we need to know this, and we need these. We need 100 fields on the quote to update so that we can report on all these crazy things. If they had a single sales user in there whose job was going to be to use this on the daily basis, they'd look at you and go, you want me to do what every day? Similarly, you have an absence of people from accounting and finance, legal and compliance, operations. Sometimes you might not even speak to a product manager who understands how the product actually works. And so then you end up with a situation where the pie in the sky sales leader is all, and we're going to do this and that and this is all the stuff, and it's great. And then you get to the end of the project, and product management didn't even know there was a project going on, because they've been working on their own stuff. And then they figure out, well, hold on, you're configuring it how, well, the product doesn't actually work like that. You can't do that. And then legal and compliance chime in and go, wait, you changed how you're selling? We haven't reviewed the terms and conditions. You're not allowed to sell in that country. So why are you able to sell things in that current, or we don't do things in that currency? Finance and accounting are going, we haven't talked at all about how we're going to recognize revenue for this or how we're going to bill for it. We've been meaning to change how we're going to bill for a long time, but we're still in limbo. Or one of my favorites is, we're going to implement Salesforce CPQ, and then the client hired like process consultants to talk about like how they should change their process, and then they hired a pricing strategist or something to talk about how to change their pricing. And I'm thinking, you literally got this in the wrong order. You went backwards. First, get your pricing strategist and stuff to figure out your products and pricing and all this other stuff. Then get your process architects in there to figure out how are we going to make this happen smoothly, and then implement the systems to automate the process that enables those new strategic initiatives and goals and stuff. And a friend of mine worked at this particular company, and it was funny because when she was outlining all of this stuff, I'm going, that's literally the opposite direction of where you should go. You need to start at the other end and go this way. But they started in the back and are trying to go back to the front, which doesn't make any sense. The most amusing part for me was that her manager was apparently writing a book on quote to cash and revenue operations. And I'm thinking, oh man, I hope nobody reads that book, because this whole thing is backwards. But that's a whole other conversation.
Yep, that's another conversation. Sorry,
When companies do it backwards,
Oh, go ahead.
when companies end up being reactive rather than proactive, it costs them a lot more money to fix the hemorrhage.
There's a saying that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And it's so true, that if you just would take a little extra time on the front end, and that's where the advisory projects come in a couple of instances so far. Well, one of my clients is a consulting firm that needs CPQ help because they don't have the staff for it. Another client right now is doing a proof of concept with CPQ in a sandbox to figure out, does this even work for our business? Long story short, it does. And we're building some stuff out to see that for real, rather than just a canned demo that doesn't actually show you that much and shows you a lot of things that are actually misleading. That, all due respect to the solution engineers who do it, most of them didn't build what the demo org is. They were just told this is how the demo works and this is how Revenue Cloud works, but none of them have done project work, to my knowledge. There might be one or two, but the percentage of solution engineers who have implemented the software as a consultant, as a customer, is probably less than 5%, and that is being generous. I'm quite confident the number would be even lower than that, which is not to diminish the value of solution engineers, because you need technical salespeople to help, because account executives generally don't have any idea how the software works. Solution engineers at least have some idea of how it works. But I mean, Kranti, in the project we worked on together, we ended up going back to Salesforce, and Salesforce itself was telling me, oh no, this fancy dashboard they keep talking about, that's out of the box. And then I was able to ask, well, can you show me what you mean? And so they opened up a demo org, and they showed, yeah, this is the dashboard. And I said, okay, look at the URL up at the top. Okay, you see the structure of that report name or whatever it was. I forget what I was pointing out. That right there tells me this is not a standard out of the box thing. And it's like the solution engineers didn't even realize that. Yeah, I could tell from the URL what the actual object is that you're reporting on, and that ain't a native object. That's a custom thing built for the purposes of a demo to sell the software. that is not a fully baked solution. But those sorts of things happen all the time. And it's got to be a balance with a software company of here's what we can roll out. We have to have something rolled out to be able to sell anything, but we're not going to have every function developed on day one either. And then you get into this prioritization. If we have 100 features of the software that we want to develop, which one goes first, which one goes second, and so on. And in the meantime, we've still got to try to sell something so we can pay our people. But in some cases, you end up with software that's maybe 25% built, but sold as if it's 100% built. And then it falls on the customer or the consultant to figure out, how do I build the 75% that actually remains before the company that's making the software comes out with an actual solution? And I think that applies outside of Revenue Cloud too. It's a
That's
challenge of software
yeah.
in general.
Right.
And business executives wanting it all at once immediately yesterday.
That never happens though.
Because they fall for the demo most of the time. You know, you see it in the demo and like, we need that, but they don't realize it's not a GA. It's a, you know, it's a prototype. You know, GA maybe a year away.
That's the literal phrase you hear all the time. Well, I saw it in the demo. No, you didn't. You did not see that in the demo. And you could think of it like, I mean, if you just compare timelines, did you notice that your solution engineer spoke to you for 1 hour, had 2 days of time, and then showed you a demo that you thought was a fully baked end-to-end solution ready to go? No, they drew a napkin sketch for you, or they built a house out of cardboard and they put it on your kitchen table. You can't live in that. There's a lot more to it. And meanwhile, me, the consultant, I'm scoping this project at it's 6 to 9 months. It's going to cost $250,000, $500,000 or whatever. And you're all upset about that because but they said it's all out of the box. And I saw it in the demo. It's all in the box. You did not see it in the demo. That's what I'm starting to say. Yes, it's all out of the box in that there is a box and all these tools and supplies are in it, but they're not set up.
Legos.
It's like an IKEA bookcase. It's all in the box. Yeah, it's all out of the box. You have to take it out of the box and then you have to assemble it.
Oh, you just described my current project. Oh,
that's a very good analogy.